Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to our /ProRevenge, where people get back at others who've wronged them. And in this episode, oh boy, strap yourselves in because it's all about shady landlords getting what they deserve. And OP tells a tale about the time a scummy landlord messed with him, and guys, he destroys the man's life. I hope you enjoy the stories. Hit subscribe if you're not subscribed, and as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. So this story takes place like 5 years ago, when my husband and I were broke college students with a young baby. We worked hard to afford our crappy little duplex, like $600 a month and necessities, while trying to finish our degrees to one day get ahead. Our duplex was one in an entire neighborhood owned by a large company and managed by a super sketchy married couple who lived on the same street. Before our kid was born, we did the normal excited new parent thing of painting his nursery and decorating, blah blah. Our lease stated that we needed permission to paint, which we obtained from the property manager, the husband of the couple. The guy insisted it would be fine, and being young and naive, we did not get it in writing because he was so chill about it. So we paint and move on with our lives. A little while later, our lease was up, and we had given notice to vacate as we were moving closer to my husband's school. The property manager was understanding. Everything was fine, and we scheduled our move-out inspection. Prior to this inspection, we specifically asked him for the name of the paint color we needed to use when repainting the nursery. The guy flat out refused to give it, saying it was unnecessary to paint as we'd been there so long that they'd be painting the whole duplex anyway. And we're thinking, okay, cool. So move-out inspection day comes and goes. We leave the house in better shape than we found it, aside from a small area of torn carpet right along the seam in the doorway. The property manager inspected and said everything looked great and that we should get our whole deposit back, which was $400, minus a few bucks for the torn carpet, and we're thinking, sounds good, boss. Enter a period of weeks where we waited and waited for our deposit, eventually leaving messages upon messages with false promises or no return calls at all. Eventually, over a month later, this culminates in a phone call with the property manager, where he said, and I remember this almost verbatim, "I don't know what you're so worried about anyways, it's only like $200 you're getting back." He cited the painted nursery and the huge mess we left behind as deductions, and I coldly informed him that we would be going to court because we didn't feel we owed for those reasons. The place was spotless when we left, aside from the 6-pack of beer we left him in the fridge for being such a good guy. Not 1 hour later, he called back, and miraculously, our refund check had just shown up in the mail. Already knowing that he was trying to F us, we installed a recording app on my phone, as we live in a one-party consent state and we went to the office. The check indeed was only for $200 of our deposit, and included no list of what they charged us for, which is an important detail. We intentionally goaded him into admitting that he told us not to paint, and that the house looked great on move-out, and then went on our happy way, revenge plan already unfolding. We didn't cash the check. Instead, we emailed the CEO of the entire property company, copying in the property manager and detailing the entire process. The CEO then sends back a smart-ass email with a cute little typed-up list of deductions, including all the things we were specifically told we wouldn't be on the hook for. A fun detail was that even by his own math, they owed us $230 of our deposit. No one really had an answer for why they tried to issue a check for $200, but whatever. The joke was on him because we began digging through all the state regulations on security deposits and refunds, hoping to prove that our length of stay meant that he couldn't charge us for wear and tear things like carpet cleaning, etc. And in our search, we instead happened upon a statute requiring landlords to return security deposit refunds and an itemized list of deductions within 30 days, or they lose the right to withhold for actual damages, and they would be subject to treble damages if the landlord is thought to be maliciously withholding the refund. So we typed up a demand letter for our entire security deposit, citing the statute, which he had broken because we didn't receive any refund offer or itemized list until 6 weekends later. And when he sent a smart-ass reply, we filed in a small claims court for our entire deposit, plus treble damages and court costs. Now, I don't know if it's clear at this point, but I can be really effing petty if I feel like someone's trying to mess with me. And it was clear that this guy made a career out of stealing money from low-income renters who likely could never afford to fight it, and I was pissed. So I spent the next month before our court date compiling all email correspondence, in which he'd effed himself over numerous times by providing written documentation that he exceeded time limits, charged incorrect amounts, etc. I also compiled phone records showing dozens upon dozens of unanswered and unreturned calls to the property manager. I then printed out a screenshot from the company's own website, detailing the CEO's role as legal advisor, so I could innocently claim, shouldn't he have known the statutes for these issues? I printed all the relevant statutes and highlighted the important parts, and then I made 3 effing copies of everything, and nicely compiled each in a binder, complete with sleeve protectors and page numbers. One for our reference, one for the a-hole property manager and CEO, and one for the judge himself. We also took our handy little recording of the property manager, admitting to all the stuff he lied about, and then pretending to never have said. Needless to say, the judge laughed at how prepared we were and asked if we were law students, and then awarded us treble damages and court fees as well as interest. And I will never forget the CEO's face when we looked over and smiled at him. All his a-hole emails and disregard for the law were on the table, and rather than giving us the original $350 or so that we were promised from our deposit, he ends up paying us over $1,300 a month later. It was glorious. Oh man, it sure frickin' was, wasn't it? And guys, I've dealt with shady landlords before, and I've been in the exact same situation as OP, where a landlord literally bullied us and threatened to take us to court to keep our deposit. My roommates and I were so young and naive at the time that we literally just surrendered our deposit, guys, because we were so afraid of going to court. Like, I'm so glad OP did some digging and decided that fighting back was the best course of action, and it was well worth it. And if I could go back, knowing what I know now, I would have fought the guy in court and ended up with the same outcome, probably. Because F landlords who try to take advantage of young tenants. Like, seriously, thinking back, I would have buried the guy. Like, he kept our $2,000 deposit because he's like, oh, there was a scratch in my hardwood floor. You know how expensive it is to fix this? We gotta pull up the whole floor to replace this one floorboard, and it will cost tens of thousands. Or you can surrender your deposit. Like, this happened over 10 years ago, guys, and I'm still mad thinking about this guy. Like, I could go on forever about the shady landlords I've dealt with. And in the next post, oh boy, OP absolutely destroys a landlord who went a bit too far. So this is a long one, but it may be worth your time to read. I regretfully got an apartment with what is, in my opinion, the worst landlord ever. This man, who I'll call Entitled Dick, or ED, has the audacity to call himself a good person in court. Let me fill you in. So I moved into my new apartment and all was well for the first few months. And then winter hit and the heat went out. It took my landlord 3 days to even answer his phone. By that time, his voicemail was full of complaints from his freezing cold tenants. He told me that the law gave him reasonable time to fix it. So we went 2 more weeks with no heat, using our stoves and camping in the kitchen in our apartments. When the landlord got his electricity bill, he attempted to raise the rent on the apartments. Now, obviously, he wasn't allowed by the city, so he refused to pay his electricity bill, thus denying all of us heat at all. I was sick and tired of this, and I knew this isn't something that should happen, so I went full research mode. I studied the city landlord-tenants laws and rights, and I found so many violations that it was no longer funny but scary. I also studied building code, and I studied the condition of all of his apartments. This was easier, due to the fact that I was friends with his tenants or had gone there to repair damages caused by frozen pipes. The landlord had pissed off all of his tenants, and everyone was pissed off to the point where they wanted to testify against him in court, but couldn't, due to the financial hardships the living conditions we were in had been causing. So I formulated a plan to get him to repair the buildings he owned. But the guy had his own plan. On January 2nd at 2 a.m., I was awoken by the smoke detectors in the whole building going off. I quickly ran to the back hall because no smoke was in my apartment yet, but I was on the top floor. I opened the door and I was greeted by a thick wall of smoke. I quickly ran downstairs and I pounded on every door screaming fire. I got as many people as possible to evacuate, but the floor with the fire, no one was answering, and to my knowledge, it contained children, so I panicked. At this point, the fire department was there and they began breaking in doors. I evacuated. After the fire was out and the investigation started, I witnessed the landlord giving the tenant of that apartment an envelope. 2 weeks later, the results were released, and it was arson. We found out the tenant had used hairspray to start the fire, and then hid the evidence in a hole that she punched into the wall. She was the very person who had been given the envelope, I'm assuming money, by the landlord. I then thought to myself that I wasn't going to rest until the guy lost all of his buildings. I then began asking his tenants for their stories about their interaction with the landlord. And this is where things got real. The guy had been accused of everything, from ripping off employees, theft, grand theft auto, fraud, and so much more. I don't know how he became a landlord. Using the knowledge that I gained from my research of tenants' rights and laws, I contacted code enforcement with all the violations of code for the building, including the illegal electrical installation in his new office without permits or even an electrician, as we knew he did it himself. The guy was immediately investigated. That night, after he was investigated, I find a 7-day notice to quit on my door. I don't know if someone snitched on me or what, but my roommate was worried, but I filled him in on the plan. I studied all those laws and rights, so I knew how to defend myself. Well, we get to court, and I argued everything that was wrong with my apartment, how the living conditions were terrible, citing a clear violation of the Warranty of Habitability Act. The eviction was thrown out, and the guy was forced to repair my apartment with me in it, immediately. The next month, I was given another eviction notice. Still, the landlord's losing money due to the fact that I was teaching his tenants' rights and laws associated with it. The guy kept losing his court dates, and he kept being told to fix stuff, and he was continuously fined by the courts and the code enforcement. He was sinking fast. Now back to that fire. The woman living there was arrested for arson, and she was charged with 2 counts due to the accidental electrical fire that turned out to be ruled intentional. The guy was under investigation for conspiracy to arson and other charges. But I wasn't done yet. We went to court again for my non-payment of rent. And I won again, based on the Landlord Retaliation Act, because I contacted code enforcement and can prove this blatant retaliation. The judge didn't even listen to the landlord. Needless to say, spending the winter without heat took a toll on his tenants. We bought electric heaters and informed the power company that the landlord had shut off all the power to his building and was requiring all the tenants to pay for their own power. Well, apparently his illegal wiring caught up to him. He had wired the apartments to run off each other, and the common areas were now attached to wiring in every apartment. This put the landlord in a rough position, as local law states it's the landlord's responsibility to supply power to the common areas. This means that his shoddy workmanship and illegal wiring prevents him from legally disconnecting the power. The power company turned on all the power and then locked his ability to shut it off until the wiring of the common areas was repaired and separated from the apartments. And this would cost thousands of dollars, thousands we knew he didn't have. At this point, the landlord was panicking. The guy kept losing in court, people were legally withholding rent, he couldn't shut off the services, and the fines were debilitating. He kept blaming his tenants and refused to repair things, and one by one, the buildings he owned were condemned, and the guy was required to pay for relocation of his tenants by law. Well, the guy didn't because he couldn't. He was arrested for attempting to sell 3 buildings the city confiscated from him, and for selling one that was condemned. The guy got what he deserved. He lost every building he owned, and he got charged with all kinds of fraud and was investigated for other crimes I'm still unaware of. But I wasn't done. The guy caused a lot of suffering. I found out the guy was also committing tax fraud, surprise, surprise, and I called in an anonymous tip to the IRS. The guy was so screwed if they investigate and pursue this matter. I've since gotten a new apartment, and everything the guy owned has been taken away from him by the city, the state, and maybe the IRS. I never saw the guy again. I'm pretty sure he's serving multiple sentences for the crimes he's committed, and he's not getting out anytime soon. He's probably somewhere in some prison regretting meeting this tenant. Holy guys, did OP ever go scorched earth on this landlord? The fallout was absolutely ridiculous. And guys, it always baffles me how some people can be this level of crappy human, and how some people being this crappy can own so many properties. With that said, what an idiot though. The guy totally deserved everything that he got. Like, how can you own so many apartment buildings and rent out to so many people and not know tenants' rights, building codes, and all that stuff? Like, how did he expect to get away with this? And in my opinion, if it wasn't OP, sooner or later, it would have caught up with him for sure. OP was just the person who decided that it was time to end him right then and there. And I'm glad he did. So I lived briefly in Florida about a decade ago, which is where I met my partner. It wasn't long after we met that we moved in together, due to my not-so-great living situation. We found a nice little 2-bedroom house that was owned by this elderly couple that lived just a few blocks away. Everything was okay. We did find cockroaches after we moved in, which is quite shocking as I'm extremely clean and never had roaches before. And when we told the landlord, they told us that they weren't roaches but palmetto bugs, and refused to have an exterminator come in, which is bad sign number 1. And then a hurricane blows in. This was Florida, after all. It was only a Category 1 or Cat 2, I don't really remember, but there was substantial damage to the roof and a lot of water had gotten in. Being northerners, we had no real idea how to prepare properly, and the landlords just told us to lower the hurricane shutters, so that's all we did. It wasn't long after that we had mold on our walls, especially in the laundry room. So we reported to the landlords and they told us to wash it down with bleach water. So we did, and it came right back, so it was a constant cleaning process. When we complained, we were told that that's what life in Florida is like. They also came and took a look at the roof, and from the yard, they told us, "You two are young people, just go up there and fix it, and let us know when you're done." And we're thinking, yeah, no. And that's when another hurricane blows through. Again, only a Cat 1 or Cat 2. But this time, we had windows broken during the storm. And since our roof was still not repaired or even tarped off from the last storm, the carpets and furniture were soaked. Here comes the black mold again, but this time not only on our walls, but on the carpets and furniture too. I spent the days outside with our dog, and we were sleeping in my partner's office. Our landlords once again told us to clean it up with bleach water and that the damage was our fault since we didn't prepare well and we hadn't fixed the roof ourselves like we were told. So we called the city and we had an inspector come by. The guy walked in and he balked at what he found. Black mold all over the carpets and walls, and the roach population was booming. He then looked at the roof that was in need of repair prior to the storm. It hadn't been tarped. And the best part is, when I was standing at the open door with the inspector inside, the old man comes walking up and he talked about how we'd better have repaired the roof and how they were going to charge us for the repairs, the carpet replacement, and the mold removal, yada yada yada. Cue the city worker who comes around the corner and asked if he was the owner. He said yes, and the inspector told him that he was condemning the house because it wasn't habitable, and that it was not our responsibility as tenants to make or pay for the repairs. He also recommended that we be released from the lease, and I've never seen an old man wobble away so fast. Later that night, his wife calls us, raising high holy hell, how she was suing us for damages, how we weren't getting the money back, how she was going to make us homeless, blah blah blah. She also said she removed the condemned/danger signage that was placed on the door because, quote, it was embarrassing. People knew it was their property. But she made one mistake. She wrote us a strongly worded letter how we were taking advantage of the elderly, and how all the damages were our fault since we didn't do any repairs, and how she wouldn't release us from the lease, and how many lawsuits she was going to hit us with. After contacting the inspector who saw our house, who took another trip to the house to replace the signage, we turned all of this in. The guy just laughed and sighed, and he said he knew exactly how to handle this since he saw this all the time after hurricanes. And if they actually sued, he would testify in our favor since what they were doing was highly illegal. He then told us that he was gonna pay them a little visit and make sure the letters got into the hands of the right people, as well as how he had to replace the signs, another thing she admitted in the letters. About a week later, we got this really pleasant call from the landlady, saying we were such wonderful tenants and how she was refunding our security deposit, and how she was graciously gonna let us out of the lease and not pursue any charges or rent for the last few months, which we had refused to pay since we couldn't live there. She also said if we need help finding a new place, to let her know, that she would refer us to some of her friends who owned property too. And we're thinking, no. We did learn, because we were watching the situation, that the house had to be gutted and completely remodeled. We actually parked up the road with some takeouts and we watched the crew haul out sheetrock and carpet. They could have saved themselves thousands if they just called a roofer and somebody to clean up the mold, instead of making us call the city and have the house condemned, and then do whatever they did to make them change their minds on everything else. I still wish I could have been there when they were confronted by the inspectors the second time, because the first was glorious. I just love how the landlords changed their tune real fast after the visit from the inspector. And I would bet the inspector reminded the landlords that OP could sue them for a lot of money and get their lease broken by the court. Again, it's incredible how many landlords out there do not know about rental laws. Like, a lot of them just expect a paycheck every month, no matter what living conditions their tenants have to live in. And since we're on the topic of landlords not knowing the rights of tenants, listen to what this person has to say. A couple of years back, I moved into this exclusive apartment building in the Miami Beach area. I had no clue at the time that my landlord was a fascist dictator. After she took my deposit and we moved in, the problem started. The woman had all sorts of crazy rules, like shirts on for the men at the pool, no talking on cell phones in the hallway, no overnight visitors, and a whole list of stuff that the woman made up and applied whenever she wanted. Now, I knew she was messed in the head, and we generally tolerated it, until one day she decides kids were not allowed to play in the courtyard. She starts harassing my son on a regular basis, telling him that he wasn't allowed to play in the courtyard. However, I had an ace up my sleeve. See, I took a real estate course a few years back, and I knew that discrimination against kids in any way, shape, or form was against federal law. So here's my revenge. I told my son to ignore her and to play as much as he wants, as late as he wants. One day, the woman had enough, and she snapped, even going as far as to scream at the kids in the courtyard. She then knocked on every door who had a kid and informed them that playing in the courtyard by kids was not allowed. When she came to me, I simply asked her to hand it to me in writing, and she did. Needless to say, I hired an attorney and won. It was a six-figure sum, of which 30% went to my son's trust in his name. The owner of the building stood by her side the entire time. And so rightfully, the suit cost him the building. The guy was forced to sell the building. That is my pro-revenge. I had a landlord who was pretty absent. I lived in this building, a high-rise, like 20 stories, for 10 plus years. And he, despite living next door to me, was absent and cold personally, but cool enough. Rent was good, and our agreement was to never bother him about anything, unless it's an absolute emergency. If the shower head's wonky, go buy a new one. The fridge breaks, get it fixed, or just buy a new one. Take it out of what you pay in rent. Lost the receipt? I don't care. I know more or less what a fridge costs. Just take it out of rent. Finally, his wife decides she wants more rent, and she wants to rent the place out as an office, which is not legal, and she wants us out as soon as possible. I agree to move out a month early and get a month's rent back, plus deposit. Cue a complete 180 on their part. They start saying, the place is ruined. We can't give you anything until you fix all this stuff. So with that said, two main things. My cats did scratch up the leather legs of the dining table, and the pull-up bar made 2 dents on the doorframe of the kitchen, which was really nice hardwood. They come to me with this list of tons of stuff, like, oh, you hung a photo frame here, or this tile is slightly chipped, etc., etc. This is the busiest work time of the year for me, but I'm trying to be cooperative here. So I got the table legs re-leathered, spackled the photo frame wall hole, patched the tile, like dozens of little everyday wear and tear things, but I did them all because I trusted the guy. I gotta get my money. At the end, he should have been giving me $2,500, but he gave me $5, saying I still need to use the money to fix all that stuff. If you can't accept the $5, I can't give you anything at all. I was super pissed off, but I took the $5. Now, people in my building are gossipy. I don't participate, but I did tell this one older lady about my frustration, and she told everyone. The wife went from being the star of the mommies group of the building to nobody wanting to talk to her, and people shunned the guy too. Now, I originally told them that I was planning to move to another city, but some opportunity came up and I ended up renting a similar unit in the same building. So they thought they could screw me over and not have to see me, but now they did. Often. A year later, I see the light at my old place is still on at 3 a.m. and I'm thinking that's odd. So I go check and the door's open and the place is just trashed. It's ruined, the cabinets are broken, there's stuff on the walls, there's writing that says lazy landlord, and the dents on the kitchen door frame are still there. So the guy never fixed anything, he just kept my money. By this time, smartphones were popular, and we had a chat group for the whole building, so about 500 people. I took pictures and posted everything. Apparently, he had also taken these people's deposit, and there was a huge ruckus when they trashed the place and the cops were called. All these people chime in with complaints and pictures, and the guy got fined a lot for 1. Creating a public disturbance, 2. Degrading the quality of the living space, 3. Illegally renting a residence as an office, and to top it off, the building management wouldn't grant him permission to have workers in to fix the place. So it sat there empty for like 6 months, and the fines were big too. So the guy took 1.5 months rent from me, and he lost a year's rent. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /ProRevenge, where people get what they deserve in the end. Guys, if you enjoyed today's stories, hit that thumbs up, and if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed yesterday's episode on the channel, it's in our /malicious compliance episode, where smug HOA Karens are getting destroyed left and right. Guys, go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.